Hello, and welcome to the DevRel Salon. I'm Don Goodman-Wilson, and I can't stop laughing at Joe laughing at the sound of my voice on the microphone.
Hello. Oh, it's so good. The video. Oh, your microphone. Oh, when you tweeted that you used to be a radio DJ. Oh, I did not expect this production quality. I need to raise my game on every other Twitch thing I do this week. Oh, hello.
How are you doing, Joe?
I am doing wonderful. It's so good to be here. Thank you so much for putting this together. And I see we're already joined by a bunch of folks in chat. Hey, Dan. Hey, Floor. Thank you so much for joining us.
Suzanne, hey, how's it going, y'all? I'm so glad y'all are here.
We are also joined by Ramon in the background taking notes. Oh, there we go. Now he's in chat.
Yeah. Ramon, thank you so much for volunteering to take notes. So for those of you who are not familiar with the DevRel Salon, in the past, we ran this as an unconference style meetup where we didn't have speakers. Instead, we had conversations. And for each conversation, we had a note taker. And those notes were shared afterwards. And we are doing the same thing here. And we have Ramon taking notes on the conversation that we have today so we can share them. It'll all go up into a GitHub repository. And maybe we'll write this up into a blog post depending on whether or not the conversation we have is worthy of that kind of content. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Which, absolutely, of course it will be. I am just also getting joined into that note document because you have very wonderfully provided this to us over a screen share thing.
Yes,
let me open up the future. Here we go. I'm getting there.
That's all right. All right. Yeah. So yeah. Quick plug. We're using CoScreen to share our notes among me, Joe, and Ramon, so we can all collaborate on this together. And I'm hoping this is going to be very cool, but we'll find out. Ramon just moved it in front of another window that I was using.
Sorry, that might have been me that moved that. How's that?
Yeah, that's fine. Yep. So
my bad.
So today's topic is events. Actually, the whole theme for this, I think, is going to be events. So I've got Joe here to talk with me about the future of events in a post-COVID world, right? So I don't know about you, but I sort of fell out of the event scene about, a year ago at the beginning of the never-ending March.
Yeah, for sure. And this is, I think this is a very appropriate forum to do this as the first DevRel Salon, virtual DevRel Salon since physical events. And yeah, I totally agree. I participated in a couple of virtual events, and for those who don't know me, we're both freelance consultants working with a variety of companies, and I do DevRel and community consulting, which means normally I would be doing a lot of events. A lot of my clients do a lot of events, and it has been an interesting time to be giving them recommendations about events and thinking about what events mean. So yeah, I'm very excited for this. Flo says yes a year ago. Yeah.
Yeah. I think my last conference was FOSDEM 2020, which at the time already felt like kind of an edgy thing to be doing as the rest of the world was falling into this. So
same actually. I was working with Major League Hacking on the Asia Pacific League at the time. So I was actually in Nepal on the week, in the week when the first case arrived in Nepal. And I remember just being like, oh my God, absolutely terrifying. Am I going to get stuck in the other side of the world when this all kicks off? So yeah, I imagine there's a lot of DevRel folks who kind of had a lot of those events on the edge. Scary times.
Yeah. So how many, actually, I guess, let me ask you this. What's been your favorite thing about virtual events in this post-COVID space?
Yeah. So, I don't know. This doesn't directly answer the question. Let me tell you what I was hoping my favorite thing would be. I was hoping that we would, that I like virtual events for the aspect of accessibility and inclusivity, that anyone can join them. There's no need to get to a physical location. There's no need to pay up, big ticket prices and transport prices and hotel prices. And so I think to some extent that has happened. I've seen I participated in some events with some lineups this year that I probably wouldn't have otherwise gone to. I participated in You Got This. I a conference run by Kevin Lewis and Amy Dickens and some other people whose names I've forgotten, which is dreadful of me, but a couple of weeks ago. But it was really, really wonderful. And it's a conference aimed at early career developers, and I'm neither a developer by trade nor an early career engineer. And so I probably otherwise wouldn't have attended it, but I actually, because it was virtual and it was a low lift, really got a lot out of it. And so I think that's a big thing for me, that accessibility. I do not think we have entirely achieved that goal, but to some extent we haven't. So that's been one thing I've liked. What about you?
Well, actually, I'm curious if you could elaborate. Like how do you feel that we haven't entirely achieved the goal? What's still missing in that space, the accessibility space for events?
I think it's complicated. So straight up, there is the accessibility of video and audio on the internet. And, lots of events are in developer land are community driven, and that means there's not necessarily money behind them. But when there is money behind them, it's sponsored. And so, we've been very lucky that a lot of events recently have put a lot of effort into accessibility. We're starting to see, live transcription become very commonplace, even in some cases, sign language interpreters. And I think it has been harder for some events to raise money, because what does sponsorship mean in the virtual context? I'm sure we'll talk about that. It's been harder for some events to raise money, and for entirely community-driven events, it is hard to. It can be difficult to get together the funds to do something like that. You got this as a great example where as a virtual event, they used the fact that they had lower costs to put what money they did have from sponsorship entirely into that kind of thing. So they had live transcription throughout, and it was really wonderful. But some of the things that we've replaced physical events with, for example, live streaming, fundamentally break this a little bit, right? Like if you've got a day-long conference, the cost of live transcription is kind of manageable because it's a one-day conference, is a fixed number of sessions. If you are, streaming for 4 hours a day every week for the eternity of the pandemic, how do you get people to agree to give you a live transcription budget, right? So I think just actually on the fundamentals of the accessibility of text and speech on the audio, on the video, on the internet, we have seen a bit of a crawback from where we had gotten to with physical events, where I think the actual accessibility for users who are sight or vision impaired has not been there. And then other than that, I think, and this is something that we spoke about before that I think was going to come up a little bit later, especially, but I think a little bit of that hasn't come true because we haven't necessarily crafted our virtual events around all of the things that made physical events special. So we've paid a lot of attention to the format of physical events when we've moved them online. We've done a lot of hey, this meetup has free talks and a chat, so we'll move it to a Zoom with free talks and a Discord room. But we haven't necessarily provided some of the other things that made a physical event an event, like a date and a location and a defensibility of time. So I think that's been a part that's gone missing as well. Anyway, I've just waffled for a very long time.
No, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, for myself, it's actually been quite difficult for me to think about the things that have gone right with virtual events. I've only been in a couple of them in the last year myself, and I honestly I found them really uncompelling. Uncompelling, yeah. Is that a word? Not compelling. Yeah, and it's just I aside from this weird yearning to go to an airport. I actually proposed the other day as an activity for my wife. Let's just go hang out at Schiphol and pretend like we're going to.
Schiphol is a very good airport. That's a good airport to hang out.
Excellent airport. But I don't want to go to Schiphol. But it's aside from that, it just feels like there's so many lacuna for myself. And I'm very curious to understand who's getting this right, who's filling this in, because I don't have enough experience in the last year to really say that anybody I've participated in an event with is getting it right. So one event that I participated in requested pre-recorded talks, and another one had us do a talk live, and I found them both really weird for very different reasons. So as a speaker rather than as an event organizer. Mm-hmm. And something that I discovered, much to my surprise, is that when you're giving a talk to a live audience, it's actually a two-way interaction.
Yes.
I mean, I kind of knew that, I suppose. You look
Yeah.
at an audience and you get some reaction
Yeah.
back from them in aggregate.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I was forced to record a talk that I realized, like, staring at a lens is nowhere
Yeah.
near the same. And the quality of my talks that I've given has suffered as a result, right?
Right.
Like, there's none of this interaction.
Yeah. Yeah, the first time I realized that actually wasn't during pandemic. It was, I think, as a side effect of the professionalization of developer events. It was the first time I got on a stage with very good lighting and realized I couldn't see the audience, and it just messed me up entirely. It messed up my pacing. Like, I couldn't go on audience cues to know whether like it was good for me to like continue to the next point. Oh, it was dreadful. So yeah, I can imagine speaking straight to camera without. I haven't done any pre-recorded stuff during this time. I've only done live to a Zoom or something like that. But I can imagine that's very tricky.
Yeah. Let me think here. So then the other thing that's completely changed for me is the lack of a hallway track, right? And I think for example, the most recent DevRel Asia event was a really fascinating attempt at trying to recreate that by having like this top-down video game like space where people can hang out in tables and talk with each other. And I think that was a really valiant attempt at recreating a hallway track. But nobody was there. Nobody was talking. And I don't know how much of that was down to language barriers, since this is a Pan Asia conference, and there's a wide range of language proficiencies there that didn't necessarily overlap. But I wonder how much of it is just this is not a very compelling experience in the end, compared to actually seeing somebody's face.
Yeah, I've definitely heard a lot. I think that is the most common thing I've heard, out in the effort about why virtual events haven't landed with people. It's been the lack of face-to-face interaction. And this is interesting to me because I think you come at that two ways. Like, you either try and replace that face-to-face interaction in an event, and you end up with things like that, like spatial chats, things like Gather Town, or you find alternate ways to provide value. And as time has gone on, I'm leaning more towards that, because I think I don't want to be, I've always been a full-time remote worker. I don't entirely believe the idea that, well, okay, hang on, I probably do. I don't want to. What I don't want to say is there's no replacing face-to-face contact. I don't necessarily think that's true. And I don't want it to be true, because I want these events to be valuable for people who can't be there in person. So I want to believe that that's not true. So let's go with that. It might be true. I want to believe it's not true. So on that premise that, like, okay, maybe you can replace face-to-face contact. Like, what is there such a thing as, like, can you get the value of? I think it comes down to serendipity. Can you provide that serendipity of running into someone in the hallway in a virtual platform, and is it worth doing? I actually think platform side, it kind of misses the point, which is like the reason why I would rather us find other ways to make an event valuable than replacing that face-to-face aspect is because I think just the nature of people's COVID existence is what makes them not really want to participate in that. Like, the hallway track works at conferences because you are in a space that's removed from your usual environment and you have nothing else to do. You're waiting around between tracks. You may as well go hang out in the corridor. If I'm at home and I'm waiting around between tracks, I'm going to go do something else. I'm at home. I've got the whole world at my fingertips. Like, I can do whatever I want. I can go do some dishes even. Like, I'm not going to go hang out in a chat room for 20 minutes when I could be doing literally anything else. And so that's kind of my feeling on, like, the virtual thing. It's like, it's good at conferences, but it only happens at conferences because there's fundamentally nothing else to do. And sponsor booths are another example of that I think we'll come to. So I think, like, we are actually better in virtual events, not trying to mimic the face-to-face experience of conferences, but finding other ways to make that event worthwhile. And again, I think this was a great example of this, where, like, that was a fantastic event and I didn't miss the face-to-face contact because the content and the way it was run was so good that it blew me away. Yeah.
So like, what was the key difference there? What filled in that gap for you?
Honestly, it was content. Like, I looked down that schedule and was like, wow, I want to see every single one of these talks. It was very well curated. It was like every talk was like dead on theme. There was nothing that made me think like that's not for me or that's not about this conference. or like that talk, looks like it doesn't fit in this lineup. And I think some parts of that, like it's a very single purpose event. It's a single track event that has a very specific thing it is doing, and it does it well. And I think, there are all kinds of events, developer events, there are more generalist events, there are company specific events, there are like technology stack specific events. But I think, I don't think I would attend a virtual KubeConf, like one giant thing where the entire the cloud native ecosystem is there, and I have to like carve my way through that conference. Like what I want, like I think what worked about this was like, hey, I just had to flick on the channel and it was there all day and everything was wonderful. I think was like, it was very low mental lift to engage.
Yeah, that's actually quite interesting, because I found a confession, almost every event that I attended over the last several years was entirely in the role as a sponsor.
Yes.
And so already I didn't have time to see the talks. So I began actually to attend events largely for the hallway track.
Right.
And I'd catch the talks later on YouTube or something like that. Right. And instead I look for opportunities to meet with other people. And so I think I kind of have what's the word I'm looking for here? A highly unnatural relationship with events, and that
I think that's what a lot of people do, to be honest. Like I definitely did that, like before. I can't remember the last time I went to a conference to watch the talks. Maybe I think there was a DevRel Con one year where I wasn't the primary driver of sponsorship, so I was there to do that. But no, I think actually your experience is more common than not.
Mm-hmm. So Ramon mentions the Animal Crossing events at the beginning of the year. Which, despite having bought Animal Crossing with everybody else, I didn't actually participate in these things because I still having difficulty wrapping my head around Animal Crossing. Did you participate in any of those, Joe?
I didn't participate in them. I did follow them very closely because I was interested in them, and I think it was wonderful. I think it was a great idea. I do think it was very much a product of the time, as Animal Crossing was. Like Animal Crossing is going to be one of these. The summer of Animal Crossing is going to be something that like I honestly cannot wait for the research on. It's going to be fascinating. Like it was such a, we were all just going through this shared experience of losing the outside, and then a game came along that provided just the bare basic experience of being outside in a charming way. And it was like, it's a chore. Animal Crossing is a cute chore simulator, but it was like all exactly what we needed at that time. And I think that gelled perfectly with what we were also feeling about virtual events. Like virtual events went away much the same way that the outside went away. And so I think that the fact those two things came together is fantastic. And I think it was amazing for the time. And I'm so great that someone did it. I don't think it's going to be an ongoing thing. And part of that is, just I don't think virtual spaces for conferences are ever going to be a thing. I think I want to talk a little bit about roguelike celebration at some point, but in general, I don't think, as you experienced at DevRel Asia, I just think no one really wants to engage in those. But also for Animal Crossing in particular, I don't know if you tried the multiplayer of Animal Crossing, but Nintendo are like pathologically incapable of making a decent multiplayer experience. And so like joining a multiplayer session on Animal Crossing is such hard work that it's just not sustainable to run an event that way. So like the fact they made it work is in itself an organizational miracle.
So a theme that's coming up here, and a theme that's come up in our earlier conversations around this sort of thing is like, what even is an event? Like prior to COVID, I think we had a fairly concrete notion that an event was a gathering of developers in a very particular space with a kind of schedule. And COVID has thrown all of this into question, right? Like it turns out none of the assumptions as to what an event was turn out to be necessary.
Yeah.
How do you see COVID as having changed fundamentally our understanding of what an event is?
Yeah. I think I want to approach this with my community consultant hat on, which is to like start with like the Priya Parker question. Priya Parker is an author who wrote a wonderful book called The Art of Gathering, which is all about the reason that people form communities. It's not developer specific, it's people generic. But like the fundamental question here is like, why do people gather? Like why? And it's interesting from the developer perspective, right? Like why do developers in particular have all these events? Obviously other industries have events, but like hackathons, there is no 24-hour, there's no event where 200 carpenters get together in a warehouse for 24 hours to carve wood, right? That's not a thing that happens. That is there are things we do that are totally unique to the developer space, and like I think the scale it happens is unique to our industry. And my belief on that is that the reason we have these events in these communities is because developer land, unlike a lot of industries, has a disproportionately high amount of lifelong learning that needs to happen, because there's always new technologies, always new frameworks, and we need to keep up them for professional development. And communities are the easiest way communities are like a really great way to learn and grow together with shared resources, etc. So like if we start with that premise that like fundamentally the reason the developer community ecosystem exists is because of the need for lifelong professional development, and therefore events are that expressing itself in a way of sharing that content. That gets us a little bit closer to the answer to this question. I think like it starts off with it's fundamentally about jobs and maintaining jobs, both in terms of continuing to upskill and continuing to make connections to continue your professional growth. I think that's where I want to approach this from. Do you agree with that? Mm-hmm. And to what extent do you not agree with that?
That makes a lot of sense, right? Like, so I come from a background where we have events, but they're of a very, very different nature. Mm-hmm. Part of that background is academic background, which is another lifelong learning sort of thing. It's not just lifelong learning. We're all teaching each other as we go.
Right.
And so we hold conferences as an opportunity to gather and share what we've learned, not just through presentations, but through conversations and the creation of collaborations, right? So in an academic conference, the wine and cheese reception is arguably at least as important as the lectures that come the next day, right? In terms of transmitting information and so forth. And then there's another storied part of my background, which is in model trains, and
which is one of my favorite things about you.
So we have conferences for model trains, right? So every year the biggest one is the National Model Railroading Association's conference in the United States, where this is a standard setting body, right? So this is a very technical organization that's focused on technical aspects of toy trains. But it's approached from a very, very technical perspective, right? So there are lots of seminars and talks about like, how do we apply this standard in this context, and what are the engineering challenges that we need to overcome in order to, scale model railroad clubs, right? But of course, the big draw is everybody brings their toy trains,
right, yeah,
right, and that's the real part of it. We recognize that the rest of this we could do this online, right? We could do this through the official organization magazine, which is published once a month. The real reason is to get together and hang out and enjoy each other's company, because we come from all over the world, and there's no better excuse, right, than to have a sanctioned conference in which there are official talks, and we can justify this in a variety of different ways. And then we bring our toy trains and we play with them, right? And it's huge fun,
right?
So I definitely think you're right. There's a huge shared learning experience, but I also think the human connection is a really important element of these two, right? Because otherwise we would just be watching YouTube videos of talks.
Well, I mean, like, is that not where we're at the moment? Like, I feel like I see people every week say like, why would I attend a conference so I can watch the talk now? But
yeah, exactly. But don't we all feel something missing? I feel something missing from that.
Yeah. I think you're right. So yeah, I definitely take your point on that, which probably tempers where I was going to come at what an event should be a little bit. But yeah, I think like to start to actually answer that question, like what is an event? I think maybe I'm just swapping synonyms here, but I think like first and foremost, an event is an occasion, right? Like it needs a time, a date, and a place. In order for people to facilitate a gathering, people need to know how to be there. And this is important because I think this is something that has been dropped a little bit, as I kind of alluded to earlier, in that like some people have experimented with the format of virtual events to try and combat so-called Zoom fatigue. And one of the ways that we've seen that happen, AWS is a great example of this, where AWS reInvent went from, a week in Vegas to a seemingly never-ending series of things that I think is it even still going on? I think it went on for like over a month.
I did not know this.
Yeah, they were just like, cool, like really stretch it out. No one's going to attend a week-long conference at home, which is probably fair, but their response to that was to make it basically perpetual. And I think that is difficult because it also makes it really hard for people to guard time to attend it, and to carve out parts in their lives to attend it. So I think fundamentally an occasion is the first, and then I don't know where to go from there.
No, I think that's really good, right? An occasion. It's so there's a tension that you and I have drawn attention to before, which is the idea of the global conference that speaks to people in all time zones, and how frequently what that means is let's speak to people in San Francisco time zone, and then others can tune in at their leisure on on the recording. And maybe this notion of an event as an occasion highlights exactly why that's a problem, right? We aspire to a global conference, but maybe that's just not actually possible, right? Yeah. Just because, as Floor points out, like how do you respect time zones? And the answer is, well, somebody's not going to be sleeping when they usually do, or you do it as a local event only. And neither of these are especially appealing, but I like sleep.
I also think, and this might be a little bit at odds with, what I want for virtual events in terms of accessibility, but like, I do think there is I have an intuition that there's something important about locality, even like, and I think actually all DevRel people have this intuition. I'm sure I'm not alone in like, when I've been flown out to a conference in a different region, I've heard other DevRel people refer to it as like parachuting, like the idea that you come into another developer community, fly in, do your talk and leave, and like you don't really impact that community. But I also think there's another part to it, which is like, to what extent are my experiences as, living in the countries I do, being the age group that I am, being the demographic that I am, like to what extent are my experiences actually useful to anyone? And so I think that is important for events as well, because I think like, community is more than just, there are things that make up community that are more than just shared in like interests or professions. Like community is more than just what we do or like what we like. It's also, where we are and who we are. And I think that factors into the global thing as well, because like if you make an event for everyone, you make an event for no one to some extent. It's something that's like something that I believe in community spaces, that like, it is okay to make exclusions. And the place you see this is, in like communities for protected groups. Like it makes absolute sense to make like a women only meetup, because that demographic is one that has experienced problems from another demographic, and so you want to make a safe space for them. And I think that same idea of like, you can include people by excluding people factors into this should it be global conversation, and that I think there is something to gain from scoping the event down to a locality. I think that's probably going to be the most controversial thing I'll say on this show.
I mean, it may be controversial with our audience. It's not going to be super controversial to me. This is actually part of the driving philosophy behind the way that Maintainerati runs its events. Singular so far, thanks COVID. Yeah. But the plan was to focus on locales, with the understanding that different localities were going to have different concerns as open source maintainers, right?
Yes.
That the concerns that open source maintainers face are actually largely context dependent. And so while, for example, American maintainers may have concerns about how to grow their project and how to, recruit contributors into their project, European maintainers have a much bigger problem with, why am I providing free labor to American companies, right? And struggling against encroaching Americanism. And I was, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, we were super interested to learn what the concerns were in Southeast Asia and in Africa, but that was not an opportunity that we had, unfortunately. But I think basically all this is to say, like, no, I think having local conversations is really important, because then you can look at local differences across different regions, right? And that gives you a much better understanding of what the global situation is. It gives you a lot more nuance into the kinds of concerns and interests and challenges that are specific to fine-grained demographics, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You broke up a little bit for me there. I don't know if that's my internet or yours. We'll see how it goes.
That's sad.
I think that economic point is a really good one, and is one that I come to a lot with student stuff in particular, where talking about like the job market. So I do and have done a lot of education work with clients who do a lot of education work, and much as in open source, that's a place where, like, the economic reality of being a computer science student in the US is very different from being a computer science student in India. Like, in the US, there are maybe 50,000 computer science graduates a year, and there are far more good quality jobs than that. In India, there are 1.5 million computer science graduates a year, and there are nowhere near that many good jobs available. And so when you're talking about, like, okay, what does it mean to provide developer relations to an education audience in those two regions, you have users with very different needs. You have one where it's like opportunities are very meaningful and they're very, keen to hear from large companies. And then you have one that feels constantly bombarded and marketed to, because there are a wash of opportunities. And that, I think, when you then try and bring those two communities together into one global event, just fundamentally, because of that economic disparity, the way that sponsors engage with that event, it has to be totally different for two different audiences that they don't necessarily understand are at the event, right? And so I think that's another problem with the global event. Is like, for sponsors, which make an event happen in a lot of cases, how do you engage with a virtual event, and then how do you engage with a virtual event where every single member has a different reason for being there?
Yeah, this is something that I struggled with in my last position, when we were invited to participate in a pre-COVID virtual event covering tech communities in sub-Saharan Africa, and it was designed to be maximally inclusive, which was super exciting. But as a sponsor, like, suddenly the value proposition was very unclear to us, because all of the usual options were off the table. We can't have a booth. Right. Yeah. There's very little option for one-to-one interaction with the attendees of the conference, right? And so I still struggle with this, right? Like, I'm not sure how to make an event appealing to sponsors. And then then the radical part of me says, why do we need to be catering to sponsors in the first place? Do we need to rethink the entire sponsorship model for events in the first place? Is that not a sign?
Yeah.
Right?
Again, I had this just to, like, put another example to exactly what you're saying. There's a hackathon in Singapore that I was involved in, like, sponsorships with, where, like, a core part of this hackathon is, like, a normal part of hackathon sponsorships is you offer up prizes for using your technology, and if a student builds something with that technology, they're entered for that prize. This hackathon had a whole thing of, like, sponsors cannot influence or limit what a hacker will build in any way, shape, or form. It's entirely about the hacker's creativity. There can be no sponsored prizes, etc. And on the one hand, I was like, yeah, Joe as a hacker, like, that is kick-ass, and I absolutely love that. Like, absolutely, this is a perfect event, freedom for the hackers. And then as a sponsor, I was like, but this is making my life very difficult, and I need another hook to engage. So yeah, I think that's always been a tension that. And I think there's a tension that DevRel people have always had to walk, because, and this is another thing we spoke about in the past, there's a lot said, possibly too much said, about the importance of so-called authenticity as developer relations people. But fundamentally, we are doing things which, if you believe in the idea of developer relations people having authenticity and that being important, we are doing things that would also then lower that authenticity, like changing the content of a conference to suit our employers' needs, right? Like, and I think that's a tension that's gotten harder in virtual events because there are less engagement points. And you mentioned booths, and like, I know you have feelings about booths in general.
I have multiple contradictory feelings about booths in general. I love them and I hate them.
Right.
I love them because, I mean, the engagement can be really good, and I hate them because then I have to justify to my employer why I ran a booth, and it's very difficult to do.
Yeah. And then like a virtual booth, which, as far as I've seen, if anyone in chat, if you have seen a good virtual booth experience, please let us know what that looked like, or run one. Yeah, please let us know what that looked like, because every virtual booth I've seen so far has been a web page with an auto-playing video and a big call to action button. And that is not compelling to me as a sponsor, particularly because a lot of the projects I'm working with at the moment are actually just things that wouldn't fit in that. Like, again, like a big, like some of these things are usually like offers, like get some free credit is like the sort of things that would work well on those big call to actions. And like, that's not applicable to every product category. So yeah, I think that's been really challenging for me. Perfect floor.
Yeah, I think that's my feeling as well. I mean, I've seen a slightly more interesting attempt at engagement, which is having a IRC like chat. Actually, I can't remember what platform was being used for this. For people to chat during the conference, like we have here, and some of them were sponsored by the sponsors, right? And the idea there was you were supposed to engage with the sponsor in that channel. Nobody really did,
right? And
what's the motivation for somebody to walk up into that channel and go, "Hey, tell me about your product"? No, nobody really. That's not how conversations begin at booths.
And also, I think it again comes down to the hallway track thing. Well, like the only reason people go to booths at a conference is because there are down periods where there's nothing else to do because you're removed from your normal context. Again, if I've got 20 minutes spare between talks, as Floor said earlier, I think it was Floor, the chat has scrolled by. Thank you all for contributing so much. But if I've got 20 minutes in between talks, as someone said earlier, I'm doing the laundry. I'm not going to go ask a web page what it has to sell me. Daniel said Hopin has a nice interface for them. I have to be honest. The one I was just complaining about is Hopin. I'm not convinced. And they're a very new company and they just bought StreamYard, which we're currently using. So I have high hopes in their future. But right now I'm not convinced.
And then Suzanne Daniel suggests that we replace the embed with a live embed.
Yeah. So this is something that Hopin does actually. On your Hopin booth, you can take over the video and live broadcast at any time. But then like, I kind of like that. This actually gets to something which I've always strived for in physical booths. One of the things we used to do a lot at GitHub Education is build a stage into our physical booths so that we were not inserting our content into the main tracks. We could leave the conference tracks as, exactly with all the submitted talks and what they're meant to be. And then if people wanted to come hear from us, they could come to our booth and see a talk or a workshop live on the booth. So I do like that aspect to Hopin, and I'm sure others do it, where you can just spontaneously start live streaming from the virtual booth. But again, it gets to like, in the physical conference, people are coming to the GitHub booth because we had Octocats. That's not happening on the virtual booth.
Yeah. No free t-shirts, no webcam covers, no.
Which, again, all huge hallelujah and thank you to that. I have not worn a branded t-shirt in over a year. So, like, big love.
5 points to anybody who recognizes this branded t-shirt. It's from a conference.
I want to say it's Node related.
Nope. It predates Node.
Ooh.
We'll let that hang for a little bit. I still wear all of my branded t-shirts.
Can you put Suzanne's latest comment up? That is amazing. Suzanne, where have you been where there's been magicians, DJs, and art coders in a main track? We need links.
Oh, Oh shoot! I've been to not an art coder, but a live DJ coding
Oh,
thing
the
here in Amsterdam.
Algorave.
No, no, no. It was a local artist
Oh,
actually,
cool.
but I can't remember the conference. It was not the Next Web. Well, the Next Web had lots of stuff like that.
Yeah.
They always do. No, it was a smaller one.
Daniel says, I think scheduling has a lot to do with the success of a virtual booth. I'm interested in hearing more about that, Daniel. I'm also appreciative that there is, a bit of a delay between us speaking and the chat seeing it and you having time to type a reply. So I will ask you for more of your thoughts on that, and then also prompt Don to move on while we get those thoughts.
Yeah, so I don't think that's Daniel, by the way. I'm very sorry to say.
Oh, it's Mel Ganvers. It's Scrappy.js Daniel. Different Daniel.
Oh, different Daniel.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dan. I know you're.
Who I apologize for having just doxed in Twitch chat. We will edit that out.
Shut it down.
It's okay. Daniel's username. Daniel uses that username everywhere. Oh, there we go. We got an answer. Most conferences I've been to had dedicated booth times, so attendees literally had to go to both. Yes, I have seen this. Yeah. Where did I see this recently, actually? I think it might have been the Computer Science Teacher Association's conference, where they had an hour every day, which was just like all like cool, all off you go to the virtual expos. But again, do you think that works, Mark Anthers? Like, if you are looking at a conference schedule that has that, in that time, are you not just starting up Hades and playing a game, or like going off to do something else? Are you actually going to break out to the virtual booths? Is that actually happening?
It sounds like advertisements on broadcast TV. I just TiVo right over it.
Yeah, exactly.
Guess my age.
What I do have a great experience with is hands-on stuff as a side event. Yes, I'm very interested in this as well, Suzanne, because I think side events are one of the things that I actually think, which I think were very successful in physical conferences as well. Like, I'm sure most of us have done the whole, guerrilla organizing a party or a meetup alongside another conference. If anyone has done, the CES or Mobile Web Summit or any of those kind of things circuit, that is the only way of getting things done. And so I have been intrigued with them for virtual events. But again, what I struggle with is that same element of like, if I'm in a city that's not where I usually am, I've got nothing else to do, so I may as well go to a side event. How do you promote those to a virtual audience? Is still something that I struggle with. Maybe am I just being very bar humbug? Am I just like not being the average virtual event attendee here? Am I coming from the perspective of like fundamentally not having an interest in any of these things, and so it makes no sense for me to attend them? Am I just being terrible? Chat, please just tell me if I'm being terrible.
I'll tell you if you're being I'll tell you if you're being terrible. That's a bit of a tongue twister. Or I think the comments will. I mean, because I'm in the same boat, right? Like, I have skipped out on a lot of virtual events precisely because, like, I can watch it later at my leisure. Yeah. Virtual booths are terrible, Laurent says, because we are forced to use a particular software. Very curious to hear a little bit more about that concern.
As Floor says, both Floor and Daniel, you're a DevRel person, not the audience. You're not the average attendee. These are very true things. These are very true things.
We're pickier, I guess.
Yeah. This is all valid and good to get into. I guess it's, I feel I spend a lot of time, I think, telling people to get in that, to like put themselves in the position of a developer. It's good to be reminded that occasionally I need to do
it. So aside from what we've talked about, what COVID has revealed as missing in events, or could be improved in events, like just in the event space generally. Right, we've seen an explosion of developer events in 2017, 2018, 2019, leading up to COVID. And many of them, I don't know, to me personally, feel kind of forced, like we're having an event for the sake of having an event. But what do you think is missing in the event space that hasn't really been addressed yet? I don't know, this is putting you on the spot a little bit.
No, that's perfect. I do just want to briefly circle back to this concept of us being different from the audience for something that was really obvious 2 minutes ago that I should have said. Yes, we are different than the virtual audience, but like I've been asking these conferences that I'm looking at for sponsorships for attendee numbers, and the attendee numbers are not there. They're all low. Like anyone who's running on Hopin can get the stats from Hopin on who's attending their conferences, and the numbers are not good or impressive. So I don't think it is just us. I think like the numbers, I would be intrigued if anyone has had good result, like knows they've had good results empirically from a virtual booth, what the numbers look like, because what I've seen from virtual conferences and the numbers they've given me of what to expect in the sales brochure has validated that no one is going to these things. Ramona's doing a killer job, by the way. Let's just shout out this. These notes are wonderful. Anyway, back to your question. Can you repeat it? Because I did miss bits of it because that thought came to me halfway through and I had to get it out.
No, that's a great thought. No, so the question is like, what's missing in the event space? So given the explosion of events over the last few years, it still feels like there may be some fundamental areas that remain unaddressed as we see more and more cloud native JavaScript conferences. Like what conference hasn't been done yet that needs to be done?
So I don't know if I have anything for this that hasn't ever been done. I think I have stuff for this that has done and has died or has been spectacular one-offs that I'd love to see more of. So things like Bang Bang Conf. Bang Bang Conf does run regularly. It's twice a year and it's super great. It's like, and Gary Bernhardt, what's his conference called? Gary Bernhardt, Deconstruct Conf. There are a couple of these like passion conferences, and I don't mean to say that not every event isn't organized by passionate organizers. Like, of course, every organizer is extremely passionate about the event and puts in so much good work into their events, and it's very easy for me, I should say, to be here being very negative about virtual events. But every virtual event that's happening is like, you know, a bunch of people trying very hard to make very difficult times for both them and their attendees work. Bang Bang Conf and Deconstruct Conf in particular, I kind of separate because they're almost organized more like one would organize a personal wedding or a dining party. Like they are just so abstract from any particular technology choice or like, I don't know, a lot of the other like industry events. They're not an industry event, I guess is how I'd summarize that. And they get to really creative, fun talks that you don't see in many other places, and have really fun experiences. And there's like some more regular events that were like that I think are rarer. And I think there used to be one called Coffee and Code in London, which is a name that pops up in all kinds of events. But this one I'm thinking of was organized by Jenny from, God, what's it called? Jenny from some pre-accelerator program that used to have a roof terrace. And it was just like a really different vibe and format for an event. And I guess what I'm getting at really when I'm trying to think about what makes these events different is I think it's increasingly harder to meet the expectations of event attendees without the sort of budgets that require huge corporate engagement, I think is where I'm getting to. And this is what I think is missing from events a little bit. It's the scrappiness, the vibe of like, this is just a group of people who care about this thing so much that they've made it happen. And again, that is happening in every event. Every event is like fighting to survive, but like, you know, event organizers they've all elevated their game to the point of being consummate professionals. And that's just not in the event logistics. It's also in the sales pipeline, right? Are these coherent thoughts? People in the chat, does this make sense? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I've certainly seen this. Yes.
Right.
Well, I mean, the negative side of it, I've not been to Bang Bang Conf or Monkfest that Laurent mentions or Deconstruct Conf, largely because my employers at the time never thought these things were viable sponsorship investments.
And they don't take sponsorships. That's the point. Deconstruct Conf doesn't take it.
Yeah, I was thinking,
Oktoberfest does, but yeah.
what's the one in St. Louis every year?
I have no idea. My coverage of US conferences is terrible.
It was a really, really interesting one. It sounded very much in the vein of these, but it was I'll never find it if I go look for it now. But the same sort of thing. They did take
Ramon
corporate
is doing an
sponsorship,
amazing job of like taking whatever we say and finding a URL for it. So if you vaguely describe it, he might end up finding it. There's no pressure, Ramon. Please don't feel you have to run.
It was a conference focused on the weird and unusual, the confluence of unexpected things, and the non-technical side of technical professions. Hosted every year in St. Louis in the City Museum. As a former resident of St. Louis, I can
Strange Loop. Strange Loop, says Mark.
That's exactly it. Strange Loop.
And yes, that's now obvious. Strange Loop has always been my aspirational conference, because a lot of Haskell folks used to go, so I was aware of it and always used to watch it, and always used to be trying to find a sponsor, like a reason for a company to send me the Strange Loop, and I never managed it.
No, me neither. I lived in St. Louis for like 10 years, but I wasn't in tech then, so.
Yeah. Floor says FOSDEM for Scrappiness. And yeah, I think FOSDEM's a really good example. Like FOSDEM is absolute chaos. It is difficult and exhausting, and it's hard to attend, but like it has some of these qualities. I think EMF Camp is another one, and like again, the line I'm walking here between talking about scrappiness and talking about professional, like that's not accurate, because again, every event, all these events are like operating at the top of their craft. So like I'm not trying to imply that there's like a lesser quality. I don't really know I don't know what I'm getting at. Chat, you have to draw between the lines for me. But EMF Camp is like a good example of this as well, where like it's 3,000 hackers in a field in Wales for a week, and that team, it's scrappy in that it's all tense and nonsense and cobbled together stuff in a field, but like they operate at the top of their craft in that they build a functioning city in a field for 3,000 people every other year, but it has that feel to it because it's like focused on the hacking, the audience, I guess. I don't know. I've lost my way, chat. I'm just now I'm deep in nostalgia, and I'm at sea.
It's late at night and we're both tired.
So maybe this is what I'm missing, Don. I'm missing being young. That's what I'm missing from events.
Joe.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
What does this mean for me?
It's all youth is at heart, isn't it? What do you think's missing from events? You'll have more coherent thoughts on this.
You're very confident for never having heard them before. So I don't know how to put this exactly without sounding a little off my rocker.
Right.
But I begin to feel like there has been a turn in the event space towards the corporate, towards the commercial, right?
Right.
So let's take a Charlie Brown Christmas and make it about developer events, right?
Amazing.
And now apparently I've got to give Linus's monologue where he quotes the Bible about the true meaning of developer events, and I don't know that I can do that. But I worry about the fact that okay, so what I was going to say was something like, I worry about the commercialism of events drowning out the really interesting stuff happening. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is the interesting stuff finds a way of happening anyway, right? So, yes. So for example, the unconference that runs in parallel with WWDC every year, right? It's going to keep happening one way or the other. I can't remember what it's called now off the top of my head, but but it was really cool. And it's going to continue to be a very cool thing, no doubt. And in spite of the fact that they're not getting corporate funding.
Yeah.
So what I was going to say is actually quite a lie.
It's really tricky because, again, like we were talking about commercial, and Malgamvis says commercial is the word he was looking for, but like I've been to events that heavily commercial sponsored that, don't feel don't feel corporate or commercial. And like, I don't want to say that. I don't want to get into this point, very similar to the conversation around open source. I don't want to get into the point where I say that event organizers can't raise money to pay for the labor they're putting in, right? Like,
No,
I'm not saying that.
absolutely
Yeah,
not.
this is where I'm really struggling.
We have a number of Iroko organizers in the chat here, right?
Yeah.
And they've done a fantastic job year after year of, despite the fact that there's this sort of tenuous continuity between each year's conference of managing to put one together on relatively short notice, and doing that on sponsorship money. Having paid for a number of those myself, I can attest to, like, that's not the problem,
right?
That's clearly not the problem. Maybe the problem is something like there are conferences that take corporate sponsorship, which is fine because that's the financial model we have for running these conferences. And then there are conferences that whose ultimate goal is largely in the promotion of a particular corporate agenda, right?
Right.
And those can be even better funded, and they tend to be very loud, very flashy, and they risk drowning out the more interesting, less well-funded, less corporate conferences, right? There is a certain prestige associated with being able to attend something like GitHub Universe, for example, that does not exist for, let's say, a small but deeply influential local conference, that's specific to a region, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that feels problematic because I feel like sometimes these small conferences are far more important than the large corporate vehicles.
And sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, and I think part of that maybe links back to what we were saying earlier about the importance of, like, the wider community and the locality. If you take something GitHub Universe, like, yes, it happens in San Francisco, but it's not for or by San Francisco community, right? It's by a company entirely based on the community of that company and who that company is bringing in for it. So it lacks a little bit of that. Maybe that's like, I don't think this doesn't attribute all of what you're saying, but I think this is like part of it where they extract the local nature of communities and replace it with the corporate context, partly. Oh, thanks, Don. Okay, sorry. I had a thing. There was a note thing that was not Ramon's fault. Yeah.
So, if you were to think about running your own conference, right? For whatever means, like, you imagine. No, actually, I was going to say, imagine you have unlimited resources, but scrap that. In the context of this conversation, forget you have unlimited resources. You have zero resources. You have exactly what you have on you right now. Like, where would you start and what would you do and why?
Yeah, great question. I think I've organized a lot of events, mostly in the context of student hackathons. And so it's really, I'm trying really hard not to just default to what we did then. But I will say that, so Laurent starts with the first question, which is for whom? Laurent is still in my line. But I will start with this, which is, in terms of the Scrappiness, like, my most favorite series of events that I have ever run or been part of running, but also participated in, was a series of dinners occurring over the space of 2 years in London, where every month we would rock up to a Nando's and we would shut that place down. And there was no, like, we would just turn up and we just put the Nando's on a Facebook event and say, turn up, see how many students we can fill this place with, and we would ruin that Nando's. And that is possibly my favorite. Like, I have the best memories of like conversations with young developers and like with Connect. Like, most of my friends are from that scene today. And so I think Laurent's questionnaire for whom is super important. Like, and again, to come back to Priya Parker, like, why do we gather? There was no event there. There was no production. There was no content. There was just an audience of people who had a reason to want to get together. And we found a place and a time and a space to do it. And that was enough to make it super memorable. So I would always start with the question of like, who is this for and why do they want to come together, and build up from there. And I think this lets you be, and bar camp is another great example of this. If you've never attended a bar camp, they're quite rare nowadays, but like the old school bar camps were literally just like, find some rooms somewhere and get some post-it notes, and people would just they would just get up in front and talk about something they knew something about, and there was no preparation, there was no thought. It was just, hey, here's a community that wants to share together, and all they need is a room and some time, and they'll make it work with pen and paper and Tesco sandwiches. And actually, speaking of Tesco sandwiches, last example of this that I will give, there was he used to be a developer advocate for Heroku, John Stevenson, used to run an event called Hack the Tower out of the Salesforce office in London every month. And that event, again, he knew that there was a community in London that wanted to gather. And on a Saturday, he would book a meeting room in Salesforce Tower. He'd walk down to the Tesco supermarket at the bottom of the tower. He'd buy a bunch of packed sandwiches, and he'd walk up and let everyone in, and they'd just hang out for a day. So yeah, I would definitely start with like really digging deep into like, who do I want to be here, and being very specific about, you know, how narrow can I define that audience down to like, who are they, what do they do, what are their needs, and then work up from there. Like speaking to, you know, I'm not the typical audience member. Who is the typical audience member, and what is it that excites them about an event? If it's a student, it's free chicken wings. That's what excites students about an event, right? And that's where that comes from. You build up from that. Like, what is it that they need? Yeah.
Pandas will always excite me.
Yes, it should excite everyone. Even me as vegetarian, they've got the best vegetarian menu out of any of the chains. But yeah, so like that is an incredibly contextual event that probably doesn't sound all that exciting to a lot of people, but it definitely does for a student. And if you have a very narrow audience, and you know exactly what the parameters of that audience are, you can achieve a lot with very little. So today, I don't know, if I was doing something today, it'd probably be for community people, because that's currently, you know, what I'm very passionate about. And I don't know, maybe it'd be this. In the pandemic, where we wanted to talk about this topic with people who cared about this topic, and you made this happen. Maybe this is it.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, I've been wondering myself, like, what would I run? And then, like, behold, here we are, right?
Yeah.
So apparently, as economics professors are very keen to note, there's a distinction between what we say we'll do and what we actually do.
Yeah.
And so I may have highfalutin thoughts about what kind of event I would like to run, and here we are running this. Yeah. And actually, that's not bad.
Yeah. I want to hear more from you on this, but I do want to take a brief detour to address something that's happening in the chat.
Yeah, the Clubhouse comments. Yeah.
Yes. I will only spend a very brief detour on this because my opinion is probably going to become increasingly irrelevant as the platform gets bigger. This is getting very into specifics about platforms that I don't think this conversation needs to be on, but like, I deeply hope Clubhouse isn't that platform, because they have managed to start a social network in 2020 without addressing any of the problems that social networks have raised in the last decade. I was on Clubhouse a couple of months ago because some friends were on it, and like woke up one morning to see Andreessen Horowitz on stage with like a very well-known actual neo-Nazi who had been given the stage by, you know, the major investor in Clubhouse. And there's been several other moderation disasters. So like me personally, I do not consider it a safe space for anything. And I hope that we hold them to account on improving their track record before we start to invest in it as a platform for our communities.
Well said. I have not been on Clubhouse. I've been watching from the sidelines, and what I have seen has been not not encouraging at all.
Yeah.
So I really do hope that we don't start to see dev events moving onto Clubhouse. This is not actually a trend that had been on my radar before, and I hope it's not actually a trend.
Yeah.
But I think
I did hear there was a developer relations conversation on it yesterday.
Oh God.
Yeah. I'm not sure who participated. I was told that I would have been angry about it, apparently. So I'm very intrigued.
You're going. Yeah. No, I mean, I think we have, well, as many of you all know, I think we have certain ethical responsibilities as DevRel practitioners. And one of those is making sure that we're using platforms that create safe spaces for everybody
Yeah.
to be a member of the community.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so therefore not Clubhouse.
Yeah. So your developer event on No Budget, what would you do today?
What would I do today? That's actually really tough, right? There's the, is COVID over in this fantasy, or are we still here? And
Yeah.
I'm really finding myself reluctant to fantasize about like the world after COVID is over. But that's where my opinion lies.
Yeah.
And in that case, I think that, oh man, I really enjoyed Maintainerati as an event, and I would really, really like to do more of those where we are hyper local in focus. We're focused on contextualizing conversations to a very particular cultural and demographic context, and doing so in a bottom-up kind of way, right? The unconference model, or the open space model of running a conference, where you don't have this hierarchy of speakers talking at an audience, but an audience engaged among themselves in conversation.
Yes.
And so I would like to be in a place where we encourage more of that kind of interaction and grassroots collaboration. So my ideal conference would be something like that. Now, how do you run that in a virtual space? I don't know. But we'll muddle our way towards something like that. And I hope that what we're doing here actually can start to be a step in that direction. Right now, it's me and Joe talking at y'all, and y'all are talking back at us. But I'm very curious, like, what does an effective unconference look like in a virtual space like this?
Yeah.
And maybe that's having a Twitch stream where we actually invite a whole bunch of people to come in and talk together, right? And maybe that's something I'll experiment with. Go ahead.
Yeah. I had a heap of things to say. Firstly, just again, like, agree with that. I think like some of the event series that I've been involved with that I like really deeply love are on conferences like HackCon, the conference HackCon organizers. Again, very specific niche community serving its own needs, and like it's on conference style. And yeah, I think there's one of the things we had spoken about when you and I were gearing up to do this was like, we're doing this on StreamYard. It's very easy to join. Do we have a situation where we can, like, people in chat can call out with an opinion and we just send you a StreamYard link and you join in? And I think that's something I would like us to play with. For a first time, it's a bit ambitious, but I think there is possibility. I think a virtual on-conference is achievable and very. I actually think it'd be surprisingly easy. I think one of the things that makes an on-conference work is, I don't know how the on-conferences worked at you, or how Maintainerati worked, but like, I guess like the Barcamp thing, based on the Barcamps I've attended, is the grid of time slots that you just walk up to and stick a post-it note in.
Yeah,
and
same
I think,
thing.
Yeah, great. And I think like I would actually just love to. I know I spoke earlier about trying not to mimic formats of events too hard, but I would like to actually just spin up a Miro whiteboard and let people grab a post-it note on the Miro whiteboard and stick a slot in it, and then we'll make a StreamYard link for each slot. I think we should do that. I think we should try that. To briefly answer Paulus, Clubhouse is not a Discord clone. It's an audio-only social network. So it's all voice, and you group together into like you set a room and a topic, and then it's just speaking. So yeah, it's kind of an own thing. There's lots of them now. You would say Clubhouse is kind of the defining version of this new type of social media. But sorry, yeah. So would you be down for that? You want to try that?
I would absolutely be down for that. Malcolm asks, a Zoom call for an unconference. Actually, that wouldn't work because of the way that Zoom handles audio tracks. It's impossible when two people are speaking at the same time. Zoom tries to mute out at least one of those people, so only one is speaking. So you can't. it's really hard to have a free-flowing conversation inside of Zoom because of the way that it handles audio channels specifically. And I think I think StreamYard might handle it better. I'm going to need Joe to start talking over me right now for me to really know for sure.
I'm having a really good time. I'm just going to have a really good chat while Don is talking. This must sound like cats screaming.
One of the groundbreaking moments in MASH, the movie, was this canteen scene where everybody was speaking over everybody all at once in a cacophony of organic conversation, and this had never been done in a movie before because you can't understand what anybody's saying, and it wasn't the point to have understandable dialogue, but it really captured the essence of having a bunch of people in the room together at the same time, all trying to talk together. Zoom doesn't let you do that.
Right. Yeah. I think there's I mean, I have loved Zoom for a really long time. It was like a tool I was introduced to during my time at GitHub and came to deeply love it. And this is how I feel about, this is increasingly part of my thing because of Slack, but I feel like there is something to be said for using a tool for the use case for which the people who are making that tool are using it for. And so I appreciate that Zoom is a very flexible video and audio app, but it's an app for conference calls. It is not it is not trying to be an app for virtual events necessarily. There is an event mode, which you have to have an enterprise account for, but that's what they are trying to do, and that is reflected in the features and the quality of their support for other things. And StreamYard is trying to build a platform that is very easy for multiple people to come on and have a conversation that's broadcast to many other people. And so I think that sounds like a good fit for something like this, because everyone who wants to participate actively in the session can all easily join the StreamYard link just as easy as joining something like a Zoom call or a Google Meet. And that's the great thing about StreamYard, is that it is super easy to join. And to give some proof to this, during the Hacktoberfest marathon, of which Ramon was a part, thank you very much, Ramon, Hacktoberfest marathon for Raise.dev, we did 66 shows with 56 guests over the course of a month. And each one of those was live streamed for 2 hours. And that it was 3 shows a day, would have literally killed me if I was using any other platform than one that was this easy for guests to join. We had no AV issues with guests joining the entire month. And so I think for something like this unconference, I think it would be pretty ideal.
What is the participant limit in StreamYard? Do you know?
So I actually don't know. I don't know, but I believe some people in DevRel circles do, because I saw in the DevRel Collective Slack a couple of weeks ago that there had been a pre-virtual event meetup in DevRel that was organized by one of the DevRel a pre-virtual event meetup in StreamYard that was organized by one of the DevRel people, where they ran just a meetup in StreamYard. It wasn't streamed anywhere. They just all joined it as their video chat tool. And apparently there was 100 people in here or something like this. Wow. I don't actually know how that worked. I did ask how it worked, and I didn't get the level of answers I was after. But yeah, I don't know. It does gracefully scale to the display on the screen. It will just keep adding cameras in. I've had up to 5 people in one so far, but I haven't tried to push it.
Interesting.
Do you want to drop the link in the chat and see what happens? No, that'd be the
maybe. I'm kind of tempted. I mean, in Maintainerati, we tried to organize things such that we couldn't guarantee this, of course, but we tried to arrange things such that the maximum group size was 10 people anyway, right? Because
I think there is a max. For unconferences, it just makes sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, you want to facilitate conversation, and to do that, you sort of have to keep the group size relatively low in the first place. Otherwise, you have a conversation, and then you have people watching the conversation who maybe have something to share, right? But are feeling a little what's the word I'm looking for here? They don't feel like they can really participate because the stronger personalities are winning out.
Yeah,
right.
And there's a big thing to be said for intimacy, right?
Definitely, in that sort of conversation, especially. Yeah. All right. So on that note, Joe, let's pursue what you talked about, because I think this is an utterly fascinating idea. Folks in the chat, folks watching later on, get in touch with us if this is something that you're interested in helping out in. We can run an inaugural DevRel Salon unconference and see how this goes, because every DevRel Salon really is an unconference anyway. We do have some other guests lined up for future events, hopefully. fingers crossed if this one goes well. If you'd like to be on the show, you have something you talk about, say something, speak up. We're happy to have you here. We're going to try to run this fortnightly, let's say, every 2 weeks on Thursday, because every week would just kill me. I've watched Joe spend so much time streaming that his eyes are bleeding out of his ears, and I really don't envy that.
It's a fun time. Ramon is right, by the way. It is maximum 10, apparently.
Okay. Okay. Somebody mentioned Reslash. I've never heard of that.
I've never heard of it either.
We'll have to have a look at that. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us here today. This has been a fascinating conversation. I'm so glad that you came in and have been chatting with us as Joe and I talked. I've learned a lot. We're going to put these notes up on GitHub. I'll share a link somehow. As soon as I figure out how Twitch works, we're still in the learning curve phase there. So that future attendees can see these notes for themselves and see the links and all like that.
Thank you so much for hosting this, Don.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, Joe. I've had a lot of fun. Ramon, you have been really awesome at the note taking. I really appreciate you stepping up at the last moment to handle this. Yeah, this is going to be great. I'm excited about what you've written here for us. Thank you. Yes, in a public repo, Mark.
Yes.
All right.
Keep an eye on the DevRel Salon Twitter. Probably the best place for us to announce that, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Awesome. Wicked. Good night.
All right. Cheers, everyone. Now I get to learn how to end a broadcast.
Top corner.
I was going to say, Joe, why don't you dance us out?
I'll shimmy us out.